Everyone and welcome back. So this is the last video of Auth0 series, and in this video we are going to talk about Next.js with authentication using NextAuth with Auth0. So this is like a possible combination where we wanted to externalize our services to the Next.js, and we are writing SSR using Next.js, and we want to implement authentication using NextAuth. So, this combination is not really easy. There are some challenges which are still there because NextAuth is inbuilt full solution, which is provided to Next.js for authentication, right? And if I start talking about externalizing the APIs to Nest.js or Express or maybe some Node.js API backend, then how can we integrate? What are the use cases in which we can possibly do it? And there are some edge cases using which only we can do it. Otherwise, directly out of the box, it is not really supported. So in the last couple of videos, we have already discussed this particular thing. So here you can see we talked about Next.js with the Auth0 SDK. We were not using NextAuth. We were directly using Auth0 SDK, and we were able to log in with the Auth0. All the different configuration with Auth0 and how we can integrate Auth0 with the Next.js and how we can externalize. How can we use external APIs and how can we pass the access token which is received at Next.js end? How can we pass that token to Nest.js API service? So Next.js we were just using for SSR, and some APIs we have created on the Nest.js front, and we were able to pass the token to Nest.js, and Nest.js was happily validating that token, because at the end we are just using those tokens are being received from Auth0, and in the Nest.js we can write a simple middleware which will validate the token created by Auth0. Now things become little different when you want to use NextAuth. NextAuth, I hope you have heard about it. NextAuth 5.x is the latest version. NextAuth it itself is a full-fledged authentication solution for Next.js. So in Next.js, we just enable NextAuth, we write configurations, API, callback, redirect URL and all, and we configure the authentication provider like login with the Google, Facebook, Twitter. Auth0 is also can be just another provider in NextAuth. So NextAuth does not expose the token provided by Auth0. So you might be using a simple Auth0 with NextAuth. You can use Google, GitHub, OpenIDC, Keycloak, any kind of provider. The only challenge here is, let's say I'm writing Next.js application and I didn't allow user to log in with the username password. I just enabled Auth0 on NextAuth configuration. So you provided a one button, okay, log in with Auth0. But the challenge here is, let's say you configured it, you are able to log in, the token which you are receiving at your session. In the NextAuth you have a session token and all. That token is not the token which is provided by Auth0. There is no real way in which you can access the token which is provided by Auth0, and you can access the token inside a session of the NextAuth. That token is totally different, because NextAuth is decrypting that token and creating its own token. So if I want to externalize my APIs to some Nest.js, let's say I have Nest.js APIs, and what I want is I want to authenticate my APIs against Nest.js, but the token which I have does not belong to the token which I am receiving from Auth0. That's really a big challenge, right? So whatever we were doing here, we were able to do it because I was using Auth0 SDK with the Next.js. I was not using NextAuth, and whatever the token I was getting, that token was in the Next.js session, and I was passing that token, access token, to the Nest.js APIs, and I can write a simple middleware against the same Auth0 tenant. Okay, if this token is there, it will validate the token. But here things become a little different and complicated. There are some possible use cases. Let's talk about that. So one another important point. I mean, NextAuth is not that black box. Obviously, it provides a credential provider. Credential provider is a place where you can configure your external authentication provider. Okay, I don't want to log in with the Google, Facebook, Twitter, Auth0. I have NestJS APIs already created. Okay, so what I will do is all the logic. I mean, you will take a username, password input from the form, then using credential provider, you will forward that username, password to your NestJS API backend, and then it will return maybe the token, and the same token you can manage inside a inside Nextjs session. And now, because Nextjs doesn't maintain its own APIs, we have externalized the APIs. Those same token, same access token, you can forward to the API layer which is written in the Nextjs. That is like one of the possible way in which you can integrate a NextAuth with the NestJS or NextAuth with Express or any Node.js API backend. You do not use the login mechanism provided by NextAuth. I mean, NextAuth provides you the credential provider. Just call the external API while doing login. Okay, pass the username, password to the NestJS APIs. There is already a login API written. So let's say you already have a API backend ready. Okay, now which has all the APIs already available: login, logout, reset password, forget password. Now you want to integrate it with the NextAuth and Nextjs. What is the possibility? You have to use the credential provider. You will forward the username, password there, and then you will receive the token, and that token you need to manage inside a NextAuth session, and the same token you can then forward to your secure APIs. That is the one way. So let's first talk about a simple demo. In this demo, I will be talking about Auth0, how you can configure Auth0 and all. I'm trying to log in with Auth0. Auth0 configurations I have done. I'm using Auth0 organization. I will be doing login with username, password. And if you just choose another organization, you can configure the different connections. Okay, and here you can see I am logged in. Right, you can also log in with a different organization. I mean, I just configured organizations on Auth0 that will enable me to have a different connections for different organizations. So here, log in with the Google. I will just log in with that account, and then it will allow me to log in. You can see, simple, right? Now, how all these things are done? First, let's take a look onto that. So to achieve this demo, I'm just using a sample example provided by NextAuth. I just configured this particular connection. I will just show you how all these things are connected. Services, auth. Okay, this is my NextAuth configuration. I mean, if you look into this, it's like a lot of things, right? Just don't look at all these things. So first of all, I'm not going to teach how NextAuth works. I hope you're already familiar with that. And I'm just trying to help you on different use cases where you can do the integration of a NextAuth with the Nextjs or external provider. So if you see this, so NextAuth provide you this credential provider. Okay, these are existing social provider like Auth0 provider, Google or GitHub. What I'm doing is I have this credential provider, and what this credential provider is written for is, let's say if you are passing a username, email, password, right? Here, instead of validating this against my own database, I can make an Axios API call and send this username, password to external API. That will validate, okay, username, password are valid. That will give you the token, and then the same token we will populate in the NextAuth session. So here, this is like a basic configuration. You have a credential provider, Auth0 provider, Google provider, GitHub provider, and because we are comparing the password, right? And here we are going to write a simple NextAuth configuration. Here I'm using simple NextAuth. Here you can also use adapters like Prisma adapter or a typo RM adapter, different adapters. So these are the three different provider I have. Auth0 provider, client ID secret, issuer ID token. And similarly, you can register a Google provider if you want to log in with a Google. So you just need to get a Google client ID, Google secret ID. Similarly, Auth0 client ID, Auth0 client secret. I will show you how I created an application on Auth0 dashboard, and from there you can get a client ID, client secret, and Auth0 issuer. This is the credential provider. What it is doing is, it is here currently I have a Prisma database up and running, right? I have written a migration of these user table where I am going to, once you enter the username password, I will compare the username password and just check, okay, if the user is there, I will return user. That means you're logged in. So this is the basic NextAuth configuration, all the pages and all the different events. Link events is like something you already have a username password already created, email you already have in the database, and you are trying to log in with the same account using Google or GitHub, right? Then it will link the account. So here there are different callbacks like sign in, JWT session. I have commented this because this is the code which is really not required. Once if you are using credential provider, then it is needed. Sometimes you wanted to have an email verification and all, or those things, or two-factor authentication enabled for one particular user, then you can check all those things. So here the next session is the next token is session. Session is like what the session will be generated once user from the client page or server page is trying to get this. So this is like a basic default configuration we have. So this particular logic you can customize based on what things you wanted to populate in the session. I wanted to populate email, is auth, role, access token, and then the JWT. JWT is like how we are generating the token, what all things you wanted to populate inside the token which is being received. I mean, I'm just trying to put the random things like access token or something. So here the important part is when you are doing authentication with the auth 0, right? Because user already exists. Here what I want is I want to populate auth 0 access token in the Next.js session, right? If I'm able to do this, then I can just use the same auth 0 token and access the external APIs. So here I try to look into different documentations and all those things, like how can I populate the access token which is returned from the auth 0, right? Because auth 0, once you authenticate using auth 0 SDK, in my previous video we were getting the access token, but now if I'm using NextAuth, how can I get a provider token in the Next.js session? That's important, right? If I'm able to have it, then I can just connect a external API layer in using NestJS or Express Aqua Happy, and I can just connect my APIs there, which is validating the token received from the next auth using auth 0. So now first thing is clear. How can we connect NestJS without doing much of the work? But in that case, if you even try to do using like credential provider, so here if we are trying to do using credential provider, in this case you won't be able to use other social providers, because let's say if you are delegating your authentication logic to some existing APIs, right? Then whatever the authentication being done through all these three things will not be in sync with your logic which you have written already in the API layer, right? You have to get rid of these. So this is not a black box, but if you are using NextAuth, then you are totally coupled, tightly coupled with the things which it provides. I mean, if you are just not talking about NestJS or any external service, then you write everything in the NextAuth, you can build a whole platform. But sometimes in the microservice world, not everyone wants to build this big Next.js monolith having everything in it, right? I just want to have SSR and the authentication using NextAuth, but once you are logged in, I should be able to pass the token to my external microservices, because my platform is huge. I have a tons of microservices. So how can I pass the token received from this NextAuth to the external layer? So there is just this particular link. I mean, this guy really tried to do the same thing which I'm talking about. What he is doing is, let's say auth 0 provider, he is trying to populate the access token, auth 0 access token in the Next.js session, which I think directly indirectly he is doing. He's trying to access token. Now what he has done is he has created Express backend, and he is thinking that whatever the token which it is getting should be able to validate using this middleware. But that's not auth 0 token. That's the thing. That's why he is getting malformed, because the token is decrypted. It's not the token which auth 0 has returned to the NextAuth. NextAuth has created a wrapper and created a token in a different format. So here when I try to log because I also put the same set of configurations that here. If you see my code in the session, if you have the token, here also I'm trying to do the same thing, session.user in a JWT. If you see account.access token, I'm trying to populate it in this way. I mean, I tried all possible ways. First of all, here you can see what token contains, and here is the token. But if you see this token, this is not a JWT token. Here you can see two dots, dot dot. Obviously it's not a valid token, and this is what I'm getting. I cannot use this token where I can just pass this token to my external NestJS service and write the API logic there by passing this thing. So this is really tricky, and there is no way, no workaround of this. So if you have existing Node.js backend with the NextAuth, there is no possible way. I mean, I heard something that you can write a Next.js middleware and create the token using, here you create the token using JWT.sign and then verify, because you just share the same secret key between your Next.js code, server-side code, and the Node.js code. So one possible way in which one person tried to do this, I already talked about this. In the credential provider, you talk to your APIs, right? API auth login. So whatever the token you are getting from here, the same token you set in the access token, because this is your own APIs. Here you are not talking about Auth0 provider and all. You wrote your custom backend, and now you got the token. Now this token can be passed to your Nest.js services. This is the one possible way which I was able to figure out. So this is the overall problem, and I think there is no possible solution, because when you are using NextAuth, it itself provides its own token, which you have to use it, because NextAuth itself is providing this full-blown framework with the Next.js that you can do everything in that monolith. If you're talking about externalizing the authentication using Nextjs, you need to say bye-bye. One possible way is, okay, using credential provider, use your own custom APIs to return the token, and same token you will use against your APIs. But then again, you have to say bye-bye to the Auth0 provider or social providers. You can just use only username password based authentication. Another use case is, because here NextAuth manages its own token at server side when you are hitting the APIs. But the important point here is, you cannot directly call the Nest.js APIs from your server side, because the problem here is, we don't know. First of all, at the server side, we need to know that user is already logged in and NextAuth session exists. If NextAuth session exists, then you have to create a custom token to communicate to your Nest.js service. So you just do JWT.sign, create a custom token, and you can just access or maybe decode the payload. I mean, in JWT.sign, you provide a secret key and the payload. Payload can be your user object, which contains the email, user ID, or something that can be passed to the microservice. And in this microservice middleware, you will do JWT.verify with the same secret key, and then you do the logic. But it's really a typical way, right? Because you are not getting the full liberty. Here at the server side, in the APIs or in the actions, you will check first the NextAuth session exists. If exists, then whatever the token, you will create a custom token to communicate to the API backend. It's like a server to server communication, and that can happen by creating a custom key, custom JWT token with some payload and custom secret key. That's just another way. Or there is you can use some kind of a middleware or hook. Whenever there is external API call goes, it creates a custom token and send it to that API endpoint with the same secret key, right? So there are some pros and cons of using NextAuth with Nest.js or any other backend services. And whatever the application I have demoed, I think you just need to configure the callback URL and all. If you want to know that, you can just refer my previous video where I have explained how you can configure the Auth0 application with either Auth0 SDK with the Next.js, or in the same way, because here I'm using the same credentials. So here I'm using the client ID, client secret. Audience is your API endpoint against which you wanted to authorize. Issuer base URL, your tenant domain, and your auth0 issuer is also the same tenant domain, right? These are the credential which you need, and this is a simple demo example which we are running. Okay, if you see, this is the admin route where we are checking the current role and all. This is the service auth, because this is the only thing which I wanted to showcase. Rest all is the next auth. Okay, I hope you like it. Now you understand the challenges. So before you move to this project where you wanted to use this thing, just think twice. But another solution is, if you are using SvelteKit or Next.js, if you really want to use auth0, then you can just use auth0 SDK. It exposes the token, the same token you can pass to the API backend, or you just use username password based credential provider. You will get the token in the session, and same token you can use. Still, you need to write some custom logic to validate the expiry, because the token you generated is managed by NextAuth. So you also need to track the expiry of the token in the JWT callback. Okay, so that's all, guys. Thanks everyone.